Hi, my name's Lawrence Joss, and welcome to the Family Disappeared podcast. Today we have episode 2 with Darryl, a previously alienated child who is now an adult. And he's also a dad, so there's definitely a lot of intersections, and we have some really compelling questions today that you need to listen to. And the last couple questions just blew my mind. Incredibly powerful. And please remember, like, get this out to as many people as possible. Our goal is to help as many families and individuals and stakeholders as possible. Everything is free. All our programming is free. And yes, we are starting fundraising, and contribute where you can. And just for clarification, fundraising is a pretty broad spectrum. You can donate dollars. You can say, hey, I want to donate some time. I have an expertise in IT or communication or fundraising or whatever it is, and you can volunteer time. Like, all forms of currency are fundraising. You know what I mean? You might just want to, I don't know what it is, send in some art to the Family Hope Art Project, and share your story, or whatever you want to contribute for fundraising would be welcome. Remember to like, share, subscribe wherever we are. Please join the different Facebook groups. There's going to be original content in the Family Disappeared Facebook group going forward. There's going to be original content in the Family Hope Project, and the PAA main organizational Facebook group is awesome too. So let's jump into the show. The first part of the show with Darryl was awesome, and it had me reflect on my life and how many similarities I have as an alienated, disconnected parent, and that Darryl has as an alienated child. There's a lot of things that we're experiencing at the same time through different lenses, but we land up at the same place. It's really interesting, like the codependent, the enmeshment, the lack of boundaries are happening with all the players in the system. And so much of the way that I've contributed to the family system is by having a lack of boundaries, by wanting to people please and take care of people and be the good guy, and take the high road. And I've done my kids a disservice. And I'm not saying go out there and be mean and crazy and stuff like that, but like really follow the high road, the nice guy stuff, past the intention to the impact. Like, I talk about impact a lot, and the impact that I had by taking the high road, by not having some of the hard conversations, by not pushing through some of the roadblocks, is I've contributed to the system. I've helped co-create the system in that way. There was opportunities I had to say, no, this isn't going to work, and this is what we need to do. And I might have got rejected, but my kids would have had a different perspective on how I was showing up. I really just thought that they would grow out of all this stuff. And as I've said before, like for the first 8 or 9 years, I had no idea about parental alienation. I just thought it was developmental stuff and young adult and teenage stuff, and that there was nothing going on. So the beauty about this podcast and the community is these resources are available for you. You do not have to make the same mistakes we've made, and you can enjoy some of the victories that we've already experienced. Maybe they are adaptable to your life too. Okay, that's a lot out of me. Let's jump into the show, see what Darryl has to say, and it's going to be cool. Thank you for sharing that. And there's so many nuances, and getting access, and the mourning, and also the celebration in seeing them. And there's so much rich stuff there, and that's a whole conversation. And I'm going to kind of bring it back a little bit to what it's like being like an alienated child. And you mentioned there was like a point when you were going through this process with your daughters that you finally started to realize, like, oh wow, something like this happened with my father. And you started to not necessarily feel it, but cognitively that awareness started coming in. And before I ask you the actual question, I just want to also bring this up to folks. Like, if you're an alienated child, you have a 50% probability that you're going to be alienated from your children, or that you're actually going to have some alienating tendencies with your children. And again, alienation is such a divisive and confusing word. So maybe enmeshment, maybe codependency, maybe some lack of boundaries. I'd say I see that a lot. Maybe like the boundaries thing is really challenging. So now you start to think about your dad for the first time, and you start to think, well, this is maybe how he felt. And you said you could think about it, but you're still completely cut off from any kind of emotions. When did you start to feel some kind of emotional, some kind of, like, it was real, like you lived it? Like, I'm hearing it, you were cut off and you didn't really feel like you lived it, but then you started to, I presume, started to feel some lived emotions connected to that?
Yeah, so it was on September 7th, so less than 8 weeks ago, after the first PA meeting, literally. That's when I actually started to feel what alienation meant. So in 2021, and like you said, right? So you have, if you were alienated, you have a 50% chance of being alienated from your children. Well, I didn't realize I was alienated till the age of 42. So that statistic would have been meaningless to me, right? Because I thought I had chosen not to have a relationship with my dad. I still carry most or feel an incredible responsibility for rejecting him. And what happened was when I started to work with the therapist and really think about how alienation occurs, I realized, wait a second, my last name is my stepfather's. I changed it around, I think, 10, 11. And I remember my mom and stepdad coming in my room. And I used to just always want to hide under the blanket when they were in there because it was like a talk. And it was emotional. And he was like, really like, would you consider taking my name? And I'm on the East Coast, or I'm sort of, yeah, East Coast, Canada. And my dad is in the West Coast. And my stepdad's standing in my room over me. And my mom is there. And as a kid, for me, I just, it was just easier to say yes. It wasn't until I thought, if somebody put my daughters at that age, and my oldest daughter was that age at this time, and asked them to make that choice, that would be unacceptable. It's not a choice. It was presented to me as a choice. I took the responsibility and the guilt for that as a choice, but it really wasn't a choice at that age with the dynamics in the house and the pressure that I felt to be kind of obedient to expectations. So it wasn't until I could say to myself, if my daughter was put in that position, would I think that she made that choice freely and is rejecting me? I'd say no, she's 11. That's not fair to ask a child of that age to make that choice. And that's very common, I think, in parental alienation, is offloading responsibility on the children. So giving them the choice. Do you want to have visits? Do you want to change your name, while putting pressure on them? Um, so that's when I realized that, I think the first time I really realized that this was not me as an adult who decided on valid grounds, whatever they might be, to not have a relationship with my dad. It was part of a process. And then more memories started to come back. Um, when we did visit him as young children during the summer, my older sister and um, I remember my mom becoming quite anxious and emotional before we left. I have memories of her saying things like, your father always said that you're his son and that you should be with him and you belong with him, and I was always so scared that he wouldn't return you. Um, and meanwhile, we'd been taken from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. For me, I think I was under 4. So I remember before trips being told things like that made me feel kind of insecure. And then coming back from visits with him, and it was like we got picked up at the airport, and it was like we hadn't even been anywhere. There was no, how was your trip? How's your dad doing? It was, you guys are back. Oh, look, we got a new car. Come check it out. So there was a lot of shaping and influencing. And it wasn't until I started to imagine, if my daughters were in that situation, would it be okay? I couldn't do it for myself.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly powerful when you look at it through the different lenses in two directions. And just hearing you talk about the idea that an 11-year-old child, a 10-year-old child, a 12-year-old child, even a 15-year-old child is put in a position where they're given an option to make a decision, but they're not really given an option to make a decision because it's so tied into the other parent's nervous system that if they were to make a decision that was opposite of what's being presented, then they upregulate the parent, then the kid gets anxious, and then they get stuck in this loop. So it's really a control mechanism and something that the parents use in to navigate their emotional system through their kids. And I don't talk about this a lot, or I haven't yet on the podcast, but my oldest daughter, when she was 12, for 1 year, wouldn't get in a car with me, wouldn't have a meal with me, wouldn't do anything with me. And as a father at that age, I had my other two kids 50% of the time, and I thought, wow, I'm letting my daughter have her time. She's making this decision. She's doing this. This is what's best for her. And what I've come to learn is it had nothing to do with her. It had to do with her mother regulating her nervous system through my oldest child. And my oldest child was put in that position to make a ridiculous decision that was not hers to make. Exactly what you're saying. And it's so powerful when you're reflecting on having lived that with your dad and being in that position to have your name changed, and then thinking about what would happen with my daughters. And I felt my like hair on my arms stand up, and like, man, that is some powerful stuff. And just want to invite everyone, like that's intense. Let's all just take a breath again together, and just breathing in through the nose, feeling your belly rise, and then just letting it slowly out of your mouth. And just feel your body relaxing, and be in a safe place when you're taking a breath, when I offer it, or when you get somewhere, take a breath. But this is intense stuff, and especially these little nuances. And I really appreciate your delivery, your introspection, the time that you're taking with the answers and digging into these nuances, because we need to really identify how all these things are so interconnected, and then we repeat them. And also, like, wow, like these kids don't have the power to make these decisions. So I was doing a 2 year Buddhist chaplaincy training through Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we were learning about systems, right? And everything we're talking about is systems. Like, this is a systemic issue within a family, and then if you extrapolate it out, it's our systemic issue in the courts and mental health, everything. But I'm doing this work in family systems, and it was actually systems, and then we broke out into triads, and I concentrated on my actual family, and we drew like a triangle, and we put who's in charge of the family and the two parents on top, and then I had my three daughters chronologically. And then as we're working through this thing, I come to realize that I'm on the bottom of my system, and my eldest daughter has been elevated to the parental status, and eventually the other kids kind of like move along in that thing too. And it's fascinating, and it's not about helping the kid. It's about an agenda, and pushing something forward for the other parent. And you said something else that I thought that was really interesting. When before you left to go on trips, your mom would kind of like say things about your dad not returning you, maybe that this is your real home, maybe like all these like subversive things that just are made to pepper your nervous system and get you into an upregulated state, and maybe not quite as present. And then when you come home, it's like everything goes back to normal. Now you're back in the safe environment. There's something new, there's something fun going on. That's what I heard you say, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. There was no opportunity to have a build up to feel excited, like, oh, I'm going to see my dad. It's going to be, um, wow, like I'm going to see my dad again. And then when I got back, there was no time to unwind and say, oh, I did this with my dad and we did that. It, it was cut off like that. Yeah. Um,
It's intense. It's a lot for a little person to metabolize and understand. And another important thing that you said earlier, you said at 42 years old, you're coming to this work where you thought that you had made an informed decision that you didn't want a relationship with your father, and now at 42, you're starting to unpack that and really discern for yourself what that looks like. And a really important thing is the brain fully develops at 26, 27 years old. And I'm like, hey, my daughter's going to get 26, 27, something's going to change. But then there's another missing part. Critical thinking is only fully developed in your early 30s. And I know for me, I came to my spiritual work starting at 36. And we were talking about Darryl unpacking his stuff at 42. So it's scary that that's when stuff happens, unless there's some kind of major impact on the family system. But at 42 years old, coming to this work and having to metabolize this, just starting literally months ago, that's a lot to hold.
yeah. And when I say I realized it at 42, I realized it just at like the level of knowledge. And I could talk about it with a few people, like, yeah, but I didn't feel emotion when I talked about it. I didn't feel sadness or lost. It's literally not until this fall at the age of 44 that I'm really feeling it and understanding it, and like desperately wanting to find some connection. So 40, 44, yeah. Um, and even with critical thinking skills, when somebody is presented in a way by the parent that you spend most time with, by their extended family, possibly like even my dad's side of the family played a significant role in what happened. I'm trying to think of an analogy. So I think optical illusions are sometimes a good analogy because it's kind of a gestalt experience where um, it flips from one thing to another. So you see a vase, and then when you look harder, you see two faces, and it flips back and forth. And it wasn't until that flip happened that I realized that the person I had rejected didn't exist. I didn't reject my dad or who he is or what he did. I rejected the person that had developed in my head about who he was.
That's a really interesting point, and I think I'm using the right word here, but I took a training, and they were talking about mental models, and they were talking the idea about a Coke bottle. And like, you know what a Coke bottle looks like, it's been branded and everything like that. And like, if you see someone holding like a brown bottle and you just see it for a glimpse for a second, you think, well, that's a Coke bottle. And I'm hearing that through your mom and how your dad was presented and the extended families presented him, like you started to see the like this mental image and just projected that's who my dad is without ever understanding anything really about your dad. It's just kind of like all this input that you have received. That's kind of like what came to my mind.
Yeah, exactly. It was like there was a veneer, or that I had. We can talk about this nowadays. Like I had AI glasses on, and so when I looked at him, I didn't see who he was. I saw a representation of somebody, um, and it wasn't until I thought about if my daughters were in that situation, well, then it's unacceptable. Before that, it was me, and it was acceptable because I carried the guilt and shame for it. I'm still working through that um, because it continued on into my teens and early 20s. And I did actively reject him at a certain point. And so I do still feel very responsible for that. But it was through the first few weeks of being in PAA and listening to parents. At first, I could understand and empathize with them as a parent whose children were unlawfully withheld for more than 2 years and for periods of time before that. But over time, when I started to really engage in the group, not so much as a parent, but as a child, and to listen to people describe how they feel, what the experience is like, that I really started to feel emotionally what my dad may have experienced. And interestingly, some memories started to come back. The first one was I suddenly remembered his smell, and that was like it, intense. It was a good feeling. I could remember something about him, and I don't think I could have done it if I'd been put in a room with him. I don't think I could have been done that with a counselor saying, "Look at him. You have to think about him differently." First, I was able to think about myself by saying, would that be appropriate for my daughters? No, I wouldn't allow that. Okay, so it's not appropriate for me either. That was kind of the first step. And then the second step was when I see these other parents who are diverse, who are men, who are women, who have done different things, who are flawed, who've made mistakes, and I've made mistakes as a parent. So that's never from me a criticism. It's an acceptance that no parent is perfect. But yeah, parental alienation is not about who's best or perfection. So it wasn't until I really started to deeply empathize with parents that I started to feel these emotional connections to my dad, and some memories started to come back that were positive and that included a feeling of of longing for connection and of missing him. Um, I never had the chance to mourn him or the divorce. Um, and so it was through listening to and talking to parents in the group that I was able to make that bridge. Um, yeah, and it was like a shift from imagining that the universe surrounds the Earth, um, and the sun and the planets and everything revolves around the Earth, to realizing that we're actually orbiting the sun. It's a revolution, and certain facts have to get thrown out. New facts can be explained, but it's an entirely different perspective, and that's what it really feels like.
A lot of different stuff in that, and what a great answer. And I love the perspective of, is this acceptable for my daughters, and having that lens that I don't have because I wasn't an alienated child, I think is something that we need to be talking about. Like there needs to be some kind of language and around that for us to use as we're going through this, and maybe even for our kids to find one day, is this acceptable for my kids? I'm thinking of that as I know I have a couple grandkids that I've never met, and my daughter's making decisions to take care of her family in the best possible way, with which I fully support. You know what I mean? And one day maybe that will include me, but like really, like, is this acceptable for my daughters? And again, there was a lot that you mentioned, and I just want to touch on the PAA program again, Parental Alienation Anonymous. It's pa-a.org, and it's a program about doing work on yourself, and we have multiple doors here at PAA, and one of the doors is a 12-step group. One of the doors is the podcast where you're participating on. One of the doors is an advocacy project, the Family Hope Project. There'll be links to all the stuff in the chat, and then we have another door which is foundational trainings, which teaches about communication and stuff. And the reason that I mention all these doors is different doors are going to be accessible to different people. So a 12-step door is challenging, and your nervous system needs to re-regulate to that. And it's a really safe container. We're really intentional about that. And you might come once and say, and then listen to the podcast. And then you might come back 6 months or a year later, which we're hearing people say all the time. And then they come in and they regulate. So try different doors, see if it fits for you. If one door doesn't work for you, hang out in another door. Like, the community is all over the place, and the community is really a lot of the meat, and the meetings are really, really great. And within the meetings, the 12 steps are actually the program. So once you stick around for a little bit, you get into that.
And if you're uncertain, go. I had to have my camera on, because I know myself, if my camera was off, I would just click off and leave. So, but you don't have to. But one thing that struck me was it was a fairly large group of ages varied, um, backgrounds varied, gendered varied, and to me that was a huge moment. I didn't know who I'd see. I think I was expecting my image of myself, so this like flawed, broken person, which I think a lot of us might see ourselves as, unfortunately, but it wasn't. It was such a diverse group of people, and that was also uplifting.
Yeah, and it is a diverse group, and we'd mentioned genders before, and this pathology, disease, however you want to identify it, and whatever word you want to use, does not discriminate. The statistics are nearly 50-50 when you're just having a binary gender, which I don't necessarily believe in. So it includes every single gender, and every single person is affected by it, very close to equal proportion. So I think that's really important. And I have a couple questions here left for you. And let me say one more thing about the 12 step. Most of the meetings are parents, grandparents, family members, and some children. And we're really excited. We're going to be launching a children's young adult like 18 and over meeting that are specifically made for folks that were alienated children, and that's going to be really great for the community. And then eventually there'll be like hybrids where those two intersections connect. But there's definitely a need for that, and we've wanted to do that, and we're just reaching density where we're able to do that. And being a minority really in the meeting from a child's perspective is got to be somewhat challenging. And it seems like you've integrated into the community even with that challenge. Can you just give me 1 or 2 minutes on that so we can get to the last couple questions?
Yeah, so I didn't integrate as a child on my own. It was with help from members in the group. I was afraid to talk about my experiences because I didn't want to upset parents. Um, I was afraid to share things because I didn't want them to look at me as the source of answers for their children because every family's different. I was very afraid of that, but that goes back to my childhood and growing up where I just learned not to voice my own experience and speak up for myself. So it was in the group when I shared a little bit, and then some of the parents said to me that, like, no, this is valuable and this is important, and that's really allowed me to explore these feelings and experiences in a much deeper way. And if I can say, I don't talk about this much either, but I'm an atheist. Never had a spiritual practice. Um, I know from a family member who um, I'm so grateful for that 12 step programs work. I had no interest in any of that. But when it addresses the problem that is driving pain in your life, it all just makes sense or feels right. That's my experience.
Yeah, and I think that's the great point. A lot of people hear the 12 step is a God program, and some people are very God based. And for me, I'm very spiritually based. And sometimes it's nature and just, just the earth that I want to be in contact with. And that's really what my relationship is. Some persons, people say the ocean, music. Some people, it's the community. We hear that it's a lot with the community. So I have a couple questions here. And one of these questions is shame and guilt, right? Like you've made this decision as a young adult, as a medium aged adult, and you decided not to have contact with your father, and you're just coming to realize, like, was that really my decision, and what was that decision about? Like, how does shame and guilt play out in your life today, and what do you do with that?
I haven't tried to get rid of it, even though I was a child and um, uh, I was asked to make decisions almost under duress, which isn't fair. I still rejected the bond with my dad. Um, and even as a child, when I think back now, it felt wrong. It felt wrong to be complicit in it, to be part of it. And then as I got older, around 18, I did reject him. But I rejected him because I'd been given detailed information about court and child support and how he was looking to reduce child support. And I called him with all this information that I should have had no knowledge of. Um, but I think fundamentally, just even as a child, by pulling away from and then rejecting the natural relationship with a parent, it it leaves scars. Um, and I don't think fully absolving myself of those is the best way to heal. I think I need to integrate that into myself in a way that brings strength as well. And I'm not sure quite how to do that yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, it sounds challenging, slow, hard, fascinating, and yeah, that sounds. There's also a huge amount of life force as you walk through that tunnel. And I will say, as I asked the question about shame and guilt, I'm not sure if that's the correct language to ask someone to reflect on as they are in a coercive system and stuff like that. So maybe it's more like a interpersonal growth, evolution, um, heart opening. Like there's other language. So again, not the best phrasing of a question, I would say, for me. So Darryl, this has been incredible so far, and now we're going to get into a couple tough, weighty questions here, just to finish out the show. And just I welcome everyone out there again. Take a breath, take a breath in through the nose, feel your belly rise, and just let that out. So here's a couple of questions that I find to be heavy hitters. What does your relationship look like with your mom today? Have you had any conversations about the past? And yeah, how's that feel to you now as you're traversing this opening and this discovery in your own life?
It feels scary. Those feelings of, I think deep down inside, I had fears of abandonment. If I pushed, if I spoke up, I would be left, I would be abandoned. And those fears still come up. My mom is very much a part of my life. Um, it's been very difficult to manage my relationship with her while coming to terms with these things. But in my case, I don't want to not have a relationship with my mom. She's important to me, and I want it to be healthier, less enmeshed. And I think that's what's starting to happen. I don't know that I'll ever directly bring it up with her. I would love for her to find healing because I think that her childhood was certainly harder than mine. And I do think she tried. I'm sure she made mistakes at that time and may not have, but for me, I'm bracketing that. I'm saying, yeah, that was my child and those are my parents. And I don't want to know all the details. I know that they both love me. I know they're both flawed and I'm sure have regrets and wishes, but so do I. And so, in a strange way, it's creating a distance from my mom, but I'm also starting to feel a closeness to her by understanding her more as opposed to reacting to how she's feeling. I'm starting to actually, I think, understand her a bit more. And I think that she did a much better job than her mom did. I do. I think she did a better job than any parent she had, and she had a lot of parents. That is, I think, if you can live a life that you contribute something to the world, to people, you do a little bit better. I think that is commendable.
Thank you for that incredibly thoughtful response. And I'd like to say that from a child-centric point of view, it's not about one person being right and one person being wrong. And when you get information that you reject your family, like that's not anything to do with healing, right? That's just perpetuating alienation and just kind of switching seats on the Titanic, right? The Titanic's going down, you're going to switch seats, it's just not going to work. Like it's about healing, and I love your relationship with your mom. It's evolving and changing. It sounds like you're establishing boundaries that's creating some less enmeshment, and it's really your work to establish the boundaries, and it seems like it's really helpful. And in my relationship, hopefully one day when I reconnect with my kids, I don't want them to disconnect with their mother. I think that would be a horrific idea. I want healing. I want family healing if that's possible. And if it's not possible, just to acknowledge like we're all come from dysfunctional families that have trauma, that have transgenerational trauma. And one of the biggest parts of my recovery is really sitting in my ex-wife's shoes and seeing why some of these things are manifesting, and she's doing the best job that she can. And I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm saying like that's a challenging path, and I have compassion and empathy for you, and I want it to stop and I want it to be different, but I can acknowledge, if I can detach from my personal angst, that wow, you know what I mean, you are doing better than your mother did, and you are showing up in a lot of ways, in some great ways, and there's other stuff that's just not useful. So I really appreciate you telling us about your relationship and how it's the evolution is taking place with your mom.
And I really appreciate your perspective. And I do sit in meetings sometimes, and I hear people, and it is possible to separate from somebody or divorce them as an adult, and to completely change your feelings about them, to not need them again, to never want to see them. But your children, even if they're alienated from you, even if your ex is doing things to them, your children, that's still their parent. They're going to have mixed feelings at best, and that's 50% of them genetically. That's half of them. So, uh, you know, don't destroy that parent. And I think it's really important to allow the children to not contribute to further alienation.
Mm. That's powerful. As an alienated child, your perspective to share with parents that are going through this is don't destroy the other parent. That's not useful to the child, whether they're a young adult, a full adult. Powerful stuff. And wow, thank you for that. And I'm going to end with this because I know we're all curious. What does your relationship look like with your dad today? Are you in contact? You know, what kind of information are you able and willing to share about that?
I last talked to my dad just before Christmas, last Christmas. So yeah, even though at 42 I realized I was alienated, I didn't start to actually feel it until September, and then I felt this intense desire to reach out to him. And when I think about that, I'm flooded with emotions. I want to cry. I want to talk to him about how I felt as a kid. I want to talk to him about my regrets. I want to really connect with him. And I can't I can't picture I can't I can't call him and talk to him at this point without just becoming overwhelmed with emotion and literally crying. He has late stage ALS. He's got, I think, months to live. So I don't think I can put that on him. And so I feel like I'm in a kind of desperate race to make just enough sense of my feelings so that I don't burden the very end of his life, because he's made sense of this in his own way. He's found a way to make sense of and live with what happened, and I don't think it would be fair to put all of this on him. So I'm desperately ready to connect, but not in a way that would be, I think, fair at the end of his life. But I do not want to miss finding or feeling some connection to him before he's gone. But it's a hard time.
Well, thank you for the vulnerability in sharing that, and just again as a community, that's a lot. And let's just take a breath here for a second, and man, acknowledging, literally it's been 3 months since you started like feeling and figuring the stuff out, and your dad's at this time in his life, and I just like to say, like, developmentally and you working on yourself emotionally and seeing that you do not want to put a burden on another person, even though it's incredibly important and part of your healing and your transformation, is what recovery looks like. You know what I mean? That's what a 12-step room looks like we get to disseminate these things and realize not the intention behind our behaviors, but the impact of our behaviors. Because the intention to connect with a parent is wonderful and great. And there is also an impact, and vice versa with the kids too. So I really appreciate the tenderness and the vulnerability and the discernment that comes with, like, well, what's the impact going to be like on my dad? And I want to connect with him, and I want to feel too. So Darryl, that's a wow, beautiful, fantastic interview. So much to think about. I'm going to have to listen to this several times. There's so many different nuances and other lanes to dig in. And I'm hoping we can continue this conversation at some point. And I just want to take this last minute here. Is there any last thought you want to share with anyone out there that happens to be listening to the podcast? Any thought, idea, takeaway, do's, don'ts? That's a too much of a question in the time frame that we have left, but it's yours for the next minute and a half. Let us know what your last thoughts are, please.
We're all frail. We're all scarred through life. Many of us have genuine reasons to feel angry and upset, but I think that connection and understanding and love is better for everybody. And it doesn't mean agreeing with or saying things are okay, but I think it means living lives that are more in accord with our values and trying to do some good in the world.
Wow. Darryl, thank you for coming out and sharing part of your story with us. We really, 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 really appreciate it. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day.
Thank you. And thank you even more because I hope I would have gotten here in some way, but I wouldn't have gotten here at this point, at this time, without this group. And it's extremely important to me.
Okay. Like, who's not tearing up a little bit? Who doesn't have like a little chunky thing in their throat? Like, wow, what a powerful episode. And the last couple questions, the idea that you know what, we don't want anyone rejected in this family system. Like, this is about healing, and as these kids are going through healing, like there's no usefulness in getting rid of another parent to grab another parent back and just perpetuate the system. Like, how do we meet people where they are? And that might be controversial or not. In my head, it makes sense. Like, I don't want that for my kids. I don't want them to reject one parent or anyone. I want my kids to have the best possible and richest life, and that includes both parents. Even though I have a lot of pain and hurt and resentment and anger sometimes, and I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I'm working on expressing that in a useful way in the right places. And when I need to express it in a way that's not so useful, it's definitely private or with people that can hold the experience, that are not my kids and that are not my family. That doesn't feel like an appropriate place to express that. So, with all that wonderful stuff being said, we have a lot of cool episodes coming up this season. We have a lot of different bits we're doing. As you've seen, we're going to be doing the mailbag and different sequences on alienated kids and young adults speaking out, and people that are in recovery, parents, grandparents sharing like some of the victories in their lives, and all different stuff in between. So if you want to be involved in that process or just to share your thoughts, click on the podcast crew below and fill out the survey. And there's a bunch of great stuff in the show notes. There's the Family Hope Project, which is an advocacy and educational platform, and you get to submit art anonymously in any form. And wow, it is visceral and powerful. Click the link, check that out. um, the Parental Alienation Anonymous groups are great. There's meetings every day of the week. There's meetings available now for kids, at least hopefully by the time the show is released, those will all be up and launched. And the foundational trainings hopefully are coming up or launched already, depending on how our fundraising initiatives are going. And click on the link below if you want to participate and contribute. And man, it's a lot. I'm tired. I appreciate you coming along for the journey. Uh, as I say lately, I love you. I hope you have a beautiful day. And I had to learn to say I love you in 12-step rooms to random people and strangers. And yeah, and I had to build up a resource of love to give, because I didn't necessarily have that. I was really stuck and alone and isolated. And with that said, enough from me. I love you. We'll see you on the next episodes. Have a beautiful day. Bye bye.